David Reed had never seen so many aliens in one place before. The docking bay of Station Forge 7 stretched out like a metal canyon, filled with beings from across the galaxy. Some walked on 2 legs, others on 4 or 6. A few floated without touching the ground at all. Every species looked different, sounded different, and smelled different. David adjusted his duffel bag on his shoulder and tried not to stare at the tall creature with 4 arms and gray skin approached him. Its face had no nose, just 3 vertical slits that opened and closed as it breathed. 2 large black eyes studied David like he was something stuck to the bottom of a boot. "You are the human," the creature said. Its voice came out flat and cold. "Yes, sir. Cadet David Reed, reporting for training. I am Instructor Brell. Follow me and do not touch anything. Humans have a reputation for breaking equipment they do not understand." David bit back a response and followed the instructor through the massive station. Other cadets passed by in groups, talking and laughing. When they saw David, the conversation stopped. Some pointed, others whispered. A few made sounds that might have been their version of laughter. The corridors gleamed with technology David had only seen in textbooks. Holographic displays floated in the air, showing star maps and tactical simulations. Energy fields hummed in doorways instead of actual doors. Everything felt advanced, clean, and completely unwelcoming. Instructor Brell led him to a large chamber filled with weapons. Racks lined the walls holding devices that glowed, pulsed, and occasionally sparked with contained energy. At least 50 other cadets already stood in formation, their eyes tracking David as he entered. "This is the armory," Brell announced. "Here you will learn to use the Galactic Arsenal, the most advanced weapons in known space. We have energy weapons that can cut through starship hulls. We have plasma projectors that can melt rock. We have graviton disruptors that can crush bones without touching them. These weapons represent 10,000 years of military evolution." David looked at the racks. Everything seemed complicated, with multiple power settings, cooling systems, and targeting computers. He had trained with firearms back on Earth, simple mechanical weapons that relied on springs, hammers, and controlled explosions. These alien weapons made his old rifle look like a toy. "Each of you will be assigned a standard plasma rifle," Brell continued. "You will master this weapon before moving to advanced systems. In 6 rotations, we will hold a combat simulation tournament. The cadet with the lowest score will face academic probation." A crystalline being next to David leaned over. Its body refracted light like a living prism. "I am Nira," it whispered in a voice like wind chimes. "What species are you?" "Human. From Earth." "Earth." Nira's crystalline structure shifted slightly. "Is that not a Class 9 hazard world? With toxic oxygen atmosphere and lethal microbial life. We just call it home. How primitive." Nira turned away. Instructor Brell continued his lecture. "The weapons in this armory are the only authorized equipment for training. Any cadet found using unauthorized weapons will be expelled immediately. We train warriors, not barbarians who swing clubs and throw rocks." David raised his hand. "Instructor, what about simpler weapons? Kinetic systems or chemical propellants?" The entire room went silent. Brell's black eyes fixed on David with something like disgust. "Kinetic weapons," Brell repeated. "You mean primitive projectile throwers? Those were abandoned by civilized species thousands of years ago. They are ineffective against modern armor and shields. They require crude metallurgy and dangerous chemical reactions. No species with access to energy weapons would ever waste time on such obsolete technology. But what if energy weapons fail? Or if power sources are unavailable? Then the warrior is untrained and deserves defeat." Brell walked closer to David. "Let me be clear, human. You're the first of your species to attend this institute. Your planet has only recently developed faster than light travel. You come from a world where beings still kill each other with metal projectiles and explosive devices. That is not how modern warfare works. You will learn our methods, or you will fail." A massive bear-like creature behind David made a rumbling sound that might have been laughter. "The human thinks his firecrackers can compete with plasma," it said in a deep voice. Other cadets joined in the mockery. David felt his face grow hot, but kept his expression neutral. He had dealt with bullies before, and these alien cadets were no different. Instructor Brell distributed the plasma rifles. Each weapon hummed with barely contained energy. David examined his assigned rifle carefully. The power cell connected to a magnetic accelerator that superheated gas into plasma state. The trigger linked to a targeting computer that automatically adjusted for distance and movement. It was impressive technology, but also incredibly dependent on working power systems. You have 2 rotations to familiarize yourself with your weapon, Brell announced. Training begins in earnest tomorrow. Dismissed. The cadets dispersed. David remained in the armory, studying the plasma rifle and the other weapons on display. Nira approached him again, her crystalline body catching the overhead lights. "Why did you ask about primitive weapons?" she asked. "Do you not understand how superior our technology is?" David looked up from the rifle. "I understand your technology is more advanced, but advancement and effectiveness are not always the same thing. A complicated weapon is just a complicated way to fail." "You sound like a savage." "Maybe." David smiled slightly. "But savages tend to survive when civilized people do not." Nira made a chiming sound that might have been confusion or curiosity. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm going to pass that combat tournament, and I'm going to do it my way." That night, David lay in his assigned quarters, staring at the metal ceiling. The room was small and bare, designed for functionality rather than comfort. His datapad sat on the desk, filled with technical manuals about plasma rifles and energy weapon maintenance that he thought about in Instructor Brell's words. Kinetic weapons were primitive. Chemical propellants were obsolete. Only energy weapons mattered in modern warfare. David had spent his entire life on Earth hearing similar statements. Old methods were outdated. Traditional approaches were inefficient. Everything had to be new, advanced, complicated, but Earth had taught him a different lesson. When Hurricane Patricia destroyed his hometown, the emergency generators failed within hours. The solar panels cracked. The battery banks depleted. But a hand-cranked radio kept working. A mechanical water pump kept delivering clean water. Simple tools saved lives when advanced technology became useless metal and plastic. David pulled out his datapad and began sketching. Not weapons yet, just observations. He noted the station's construction materials, the atmosphere composition, the available resources in the recycling facilities. He studied the machine shop layouts and chemical storage areas. Instructor Brell had banned unauthorized weapons, but the instructor had not banned curiosity, observation, or creativity. David drew simple diagrams. A tube, a spring, a lever. Basic mechanical principles that existed long before plasma rifles and graviton disruptors that he smiled in the darkness of his quarters. The tournament was in 6 rotations. That gave him plenty of time to see just how many ways a human could throw a rock. The machine shop hummed with activity as fabrication units assembled components for station maintenance. David stood at a terminal, entering specifications for what the system classified as educational materials. The computer did not question his request. After all, he was just making a metal tube, some springs, and a handful of precisely machined parts. 2 rotations had passed since Instructor Brell's lecture. While other cadets spent their time practicing with plasma rifles, David had explored every public area of Station Forge 7. He memorized the location of recycling centers, studied the periodic table of available elements, and learned which areas had the loosest security protocols. "What are you building?" a deep voice asked behind him. David turned to see Rolf, the massive bear-like cadet from the armory. The creature stood over 2 meters tall with thick fur and claws that could probably tear through steel plating. "Just a project," David said. "For the tournament? I have seen you at the range only twice. The others practice constantly." Different approach. Rolf's large eyes studied David with what might have been respect or confusion. "You are either very confident or very foolish. Instructor Brell does not tolerate failure. Then I had better not fail." The fabrication unit beeped. David collected his components and headed back to his quarters. Behind him, Rolf made a rumbling sound that was definitely laughter. The next morning, all cadets assembled in the training range. Instructor Brell stood at the center, his four arms crossed in what might have been irritation. "Today we begin practical exercises," he announced. "Each of you will demonstrate your proficiency with a plasma rifle. Accuracy, target acquisition speed, and power management will all be evaluated." One by one, cadets stepped up to fire at holographic targets. Most performed adequately. A few excelled. Nira scored particularly well, her crystalline structure apparently giving her some advantage in target tracking. "Cadet David," Brell called. "You're next." David approached the firing line. Instead of carrying just his plasma rifle, he held a long metal object wrapped in cloth. "What is that?" Brell demanded. "A demonstration, sir. You said we needed to master weapons. I built one. You were assigned a plasma rifle." "Yes, sir. But you never said we could not study other weapon systems for educational purposes." Brell's black eyes narrowed. "Show me." David unwrapped the cloth, revealing a sleek metal tube with a grip, trigger mechanism, and a magazine of solid projectiles. It was crude by Earth standards, basically a simple rifle without much refinement, but it was functional. The other cadets moved closer, curiosity overcoming mockery. "This is a chemical propulsion kinetic weapon," David explained. "It uses a controlled explosion to accelerate a metal projectile at high velocity. No power cell required. No cooling system needed. Just basic chemistry and physics." "Primitive," Brell said, but his tone carried a hint of uncertainty. "Permission to demonstrate, sir." Brell gestured toward the targets. "Proceed." David aimed at a target designed to absorb plasma fire. The material was energy resistant, capable of withstanding multiple direct hits from standard rifles. He squeezed the trigger. The sound shocked everyone. None of them had heard a gunshot before. It cracked through the range like thunder, sharp and violent, and completely unlike the soft hum of energy weapons. The projectile punched through the target, leaving a clean hole. Pieces of the energy-resistant material scattered across the floor. Silence filled the range. David lowered his weapon. "It works on a different principle than your weapons, sir. Energy resistance does not help against kinetic impact." Instructor Brell stared at the destroyed target. His gray skin seemed to pale slightly. "That weapon is not on the approved list." "Yes, sir. It is therefore banned." "Hand it over." David complied without argument. Brell took the firearm and examined it with all four hands, turning it over as if it might explode. "Primitive chemical propulsion kinetic weapons are now prohibited in all training areas," Brell announced to the assembled cadets. "We use civilized technology here, not explosive powder and metal slugs." "Understood, Instructor," David said calmly. That evening, David returned to the machine shop. He spent 3 hours building something new, humming quietly as he worked. The next morning, he arrived at the range carrying a curved piece of flexible metal with a string attached. Instructor Brell's eyes widened. "What is that?" "A bow, sir. It uses elastic potential energy to launch projectiles. No chemicals, no explosions. Just physics." Before Brell could respond, David knocked an arrow made from a metal rod, drew back the string, and fired. The arrow flew across the range and embedded itself in a target with enough force to crack the surface. "Where did you get those materials?" Brell demanded. "The recycling center. Everything I used was classified as scrap." "Elastic propulsion weapons are now banned," Brell announced through gritted teeth. "Yes, sir." On the third day, David brought a crossbow. Brell banned it within minutes. On the fourth day, David demonstrated a sling, the ancient weapon that required only a strip of fabric and stone. He whirled it over his head and released, sending a metal ball bearing through a reinforced barrier that was supposed to stop plasma fire. "Centrifugal weapons are banned," Brell announced, his voice rising. On the fifth day, David arrived with an otlotl, a spear-throwing tool that increased the range and power of thrown projectiles through leverage. Brell did not even let him demonstrate. All primitive kinetic weapons, projectile systems, and pre-industrial combat tools are now banned. Everything. No more metal tubes, no more elastic devices, no more throwing implements. The only authorized weapons are those in the Galactic arsenal. "Is that clear?" "Crystal clear, Instructor," David said. Nira approached David after the session ended. Why do you keep making weapons that the instructor bans? You have wasted 5 rotations building things you cannot use in the tournament. Have I? You have no approved weapon. You spent all your time on banned equipment. David smiled. I spent all my time learning how to make weapons from nothing. That seems useful. The tournament is tomorrow. You will fail. Maybe. Or maybe I learned something everyone else missed. That night, Instructor Brell sat in his office reviewing footage of David's demonstrations. Each weapon was simpler than the last, yet each one had been effective. The human had not used advanced technology, sophisticated targeting systems, or powerful energy sources. He had used basic materials and fundamental physics. Brell replayed the video of the sling. A piece of fabric and a stone. Yet the projectile had penetrated a barrier designed to withstand plasma fire. The energy resistance that made the barrier effective against modern weapons meant nothing against simple kinetic force. For the first time in 300 years of teaching, Brell felt something unfamiliar. Not quite respect, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. The human was not being difficult. He was being thorough. Every banned weapon taught him something new about Station Forge 7's materials, about physics, about improvisation. Brell pulled up David's file. Earth was listed as a Class 9 hazard world. Lethal atmosphere for most species. Extreme weather. Dangerous microbial life. Predatory megafauna. High gravity. Active tectonics. And yet humans thrive there. They did not just survive their planet. They dominated it using nothing but creativity and persistence. Brell closed the file and made a note in David's record. The note simply read, "Recommend observation during tournament." Subject demonstrates concerning adaptability. He did not write what he was really thinking. That perhaps civilized species had forgotten something important when they abandoned primitive weapons. That complexity was not the same as superiority. That a species which could turn scrap metal into functional weapons might be more dangerous than one that relied on technology they did not fully understand. Instructor Brell turned off his terminal and sat in the darkness of his office, wondering what the human would do tomorrow when faced with an opponent and no banned weapons to fall back on. That he suspected he was about to find out why Earth was classified as a Class 9 hazard world. The training range had been transformed overnight. Instead of the usual open floor with targets, the space now resembled an asteroid mining facility. Holographic projectors created the illusion of tight corridors, industrial equipment, and unstable gravity fields that flickered and shifted every few seconds. David studied the environment carefully while other cadets checked their plasma rifles one final time. The tournament was about to begin, but first Instructor Brell had announced a special demonstration. "Cadet David," Brell called out. "Step forward." David walked to the center of the range. Every cadet watched him. After 5 days of building and getting weapons banned, they all wanted to see what the human would do now. "You have spent the week creating primitive weapons instead of training," Brell said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Today you will face Cadet Rolf in a non-lethal combat scenario. You will use only your assigned plasma rifle. No imprevised devices. No unauthorized equipment. Just a weapon you should have been practicing with all along." Rolf stepped forward, looking apologetic. "Nothing personal, human." The massive creature rumbled. "None taken." Brell gestured toward the simulated asteroid facility. "The scenario is simple. Incapacitate your opponent using any means necessary, but no lethal force. The simulation safeties will prevent actual harm. Begin when ready." David and Rolf entered the arena from opposite sides. The holographic environment felt real enough. The gravity fluctuations pulled at David's body, making each step unpredictable. Metal walls rose up around him, creating a maze of industrial corridors. "Begin," Brell announced. Rolf charged forward immediately, his plasma rifle firing. Bolts of superheated energy sizzled through the air where David had been standing a moment before. David ran. The watching cadets murmured in confusion. Nira's crystalline structure flickered with what might have been disappointment. "The human is fleeing," someone said. "He knows he cannot win." Another added, but David was not fleeing. He was moving with purpose, eyes scanning the environment. He dropped his plasma rifle and grabbed a metal panel from the simulated wall. The holographic projection was solid enough to interact with, designed to make the training realistic. Rolf pursued, firing continuously. David used the metal panel as a shield, deflecting plasma bolts that would have tagged him out of the simulation. Clever, Brell muttered, but insufficient. David sprinted down a corridor and ripped a pipe from a damaged conduit. Water sprayed out, creating a mist that obscured Rolf's vision. David used the distraction to circle around behind his opponent. Rolf spun, firing blindly. His shots went wide. David swung the pipe like a staff, striking Rolf's plasma rifle and knocking it from the large creature's hands. The weapon clattered across the floor. Now they are even, Nira observed, but David was not done. He activated a control panel on the wall, triggering one of the gravity field generators. The section of floor where Rolf stood suddenly increased to 3 times normal gravity. Rolf collapsed under his own weight, unable to move. The creature struggled, but could not overcome the gravitational force pressing down on his massive body. David walked calmly to where Rolf lay immobilized. He pulled off his belt and used it to bind Rolf's arms, just tight enough to constitute an incapacitation under tournament rules. Simulation complete, the computer announced. Winner, Cadet David. The arena went completely silent. David helped Rolf to his feet once the gravity field deactivated. You are strong and fast, David said, but strength does not matter if you cannot move. Rolf made a sound between a laugh and a growl. You did not even use your weapon. I used everything around me. That is what weapons are for. Instructor Brell descended to the arena floor, his 4 arms crossed tightly. You abandoned your assigned weapon. No, sir. I chose not to fire it. That is different. You used the environment. Yes, sir. The scenario said I could use any means necessary. The environment is a means. Brell's eyes narrowed. You deliberately misinterpreted the exercise. I won the exercise, David corrected gently. There is a difference. The other cadets began talking among themselves. Some seemed impressed. Others seemed disturbed. All of them looked at David differently than they had before. Silence, Brell commanded. The talking stopped immediately. The tournament will proceed as scheduled. However, there is a rule change. All matches will take place in a sterile arena with no environmental features, no objects, and no materials except your assigned weapon. Nothing to improvise with. Nothing to exploit. David nodded. Understood, Instructor. You will learn that real warriors rely on superior technology and training, not tricks. Yes, sir. But as David walked back to join the other cadets, Nira stepped beside him. You knew he would change the rules, she whispered. I suspected. Then why demonstrate what you could do? Why not save it for the tournament? David glanced back at Instructor Brell, who was speaking with other faculty members. Because now he thinks he has neutralized my advantage. He thinks a sterile environment removes everything I learned this week. Does it not? Not even close. That evening, David requested a meeting with Instructor Brell. The instructor granted it, probably curious about what the human wanted. Brell's office was sparse and military in its organization. Weapons lined one wall, each one a masterpiece of galactic engineering. Brell sat behind a desk that seemed too small for his four-armed frame. Speak, Brell commanded. I wanted to ask about the purpose of this training, sir. To create warriors capable of defending the Galactic Council. And where do these warriors fight? In sterile arenas with no features and perfect conditions. Brell's eyes hardened. Battlefields are chaotic, but warriors must first master their weapons before learning to master chaos. Respectfully, sir, I disagree. Chaos is not something you master after learning weapons. Chaos is the first lesson, not the last. You presume to lecture me? I have trained warriors for 300 years. And how many of those warriors have fought on a Class 9 hazard world? Brell paused. None. Such worlds are not strategically significant. Earth is, and every human grows up learning that environments are not neutral. They are weapons, resources, and threats all at once. We do not separate weapon training from environmental training because we cannot afford to. Your species thinks survival makes you clever. Survival just makes you desperate. David met Brell's gaze steadily. Instructor, What if desperate and clever are the same thing? What if the reason humans survived Earth is because we learned that everything around us is either trying to kill us or trying to help us, and the difference depends entirely on how we use it? Brell said nothing for a long moment. Then he leaned forward. Tomorrow you will fight in a sterile arena with nothing but your plasma rifle. We will see how clever desperation is when you have nothing to improvise with. Yes, sir. Thank you for your time. David left the office and walked back to his quarters. He did not practice with the plasma rifle. Instead, he sat on his bunk and thought about geometry, angles, and the fact that even empty space has properties that can be exploited. The sterile arena would have walls. It would have floors and ceilings. It would have light sources and gravity. Instructor Brell thought he was removing all variables. But he was really just creating a different set of variables, ones that David had already started calculating. Back in his office, Brell reviewed the footage of David's fight with Rolf one more time. The human had not been lucky. Every move had been deliberate, calculated, and efficient. David had turned a mining facility simulation into an arsenal without carrying a single weapon into the arena. Brell opened a secure channel to Commander Voss, the station overseer. "Commander, I need to report unusual behavior from the human cadet." "I watched the demonstration," Voss replied. His voice carried an edge of interest rather than concern. "Quite impressive. He is disruptive and refuses to follow standard doctrine. He won his match without firing a shot, against one of our strongest cadets. That is not disruption, Instructor. That is innovation. He makes weapons from nothing." "Exactly." There was a pause. "Push him harder, Brell. I want to see what happens when this human has absolutely nothing to work with. No banned weapons, no environment to exploit, nothing but empty space and a rifle he barely knows how to use. And if he fails, then we learned that human adaptability has limits. And if he succeeds," Commander Voss's tone turned cold and calculated, "then we learned something far more valuable." The communication ended. Brell sat in darkness, wondering what exactly they were about to learn about humanity, and whether that knowledge would be reassuring or terrifying. The sterile arena lived up to its name. A perfect sphere, 20 meters in diameter, walls smooth as glass, no features, no objects, nothing but empty white space. Even the gravity felt artificial, maintained at exactly one standard galactic unit with no fluctuations. David stood at one end holding his plasma rifle. Across the sphere, a holographic opponent materialized. The tournament had begun. Every cadet in the Institute watched on displays throughout the station. After David's demonstration against Rolf, everyone wanted to see if the human could actually fight when stripped of his environmental advantages. "Match begins in 10 seconds, the computer announced. David studied the arena carefully. White walls, uniform lighting from panels built into the ceiling, perfectly smooth floor. Instructor Brell had designed this specifically to neutralize everything David had learned. The countdown reached 0. David's opponent, a holographic Torgoth warrior like Brell, opened fire immediately. Plasma bolts streaked across the arena. David dove to the side, rolling and coming up in a different position. His opponent adjusted aim and fired again. Most cadets would have returned fire. David did not. He kept moving, studying the angles of the arena, watching how the light reflected off the walls, calculating distances and trajectories. His opponent fired continuously, each shot forcing David to move. The hologram was learning, adapting to David's movement patterns, predicting where he would go next. After 30 seconds of evasion, David finally raised his plasma rifle. But instead of aiming at his opponent, he fired at the wall behind and to the left of the hologram. "What is he doing?" someone asked in the observation area. Nira leaned closer to her display. "Watch the angle." The plasma bolt hit the wall at precisely 45 degrees. The energy reflected, bouncing off the smooth surface. It struck the opposite wall and bounced again. The third impact hit David's opponent directly in the back. The hologram flickered and staggered. One hit scored. David fired again, this time at a different wall at a different angle. The bolt bounced twice and struck the opponent from the side. The hologram tried to dodge, but moved directly into the path of another reflected shot David had already calculated. Impossible à cas des muteurs. The targeting computer cannot calculate reflections that complex. He is not using the targeting computer, Nira said softly. He is doing the math himself. Within 2 minutes, David had scored 5 hits without a single direct shot. His opponent never saw the attacks coming because they came from every direction except where David stood. The simulation ended with David's victory. The observation area erupted in confusion. Some cadets claimed it was luck. Others argued it was cheating somehow. A few simply stared at their displays in silence. Instructor Brell watched from his private office, his 4 hands gripping the edge of his desk. The human had turned the sterile arena itself into a weapon by understanding reflection and geometry. He had fought without environmental features because he recognized that empty space still has properties, still has physics, still has rules that can be exploited. More matches followed. Each cadet entered the arena, faced holographic opponents, and demonstrated their mastery of plasma rifles through conventional tactics. They aimed, fired, took cover behind the small barriers that appeared in their scenarios, and generally performed exactly as they had been trained. Nira scored well, her crystalline structure giving her faster processing for the targeting computer. Rolf demonstrated impressive accuracy despite his size. Others showed varying levels of skill. Then the scoring appeared on public displays. Nira, 62nd percentile. Rolf, 85th percentile. Most cadets fell somewhere between 40th and 80th percentile. David, 94th percentile. The number seemed impossible. He had barely practiced with the plasma rifle. He had spent the week building band weapons. Yet somehow he had scored higher than cadets who had trained exclusively with approved methods. How? Rolf demanded, approaching David after the matches ended. You fired fewer shots than anyone. You missed on purpose several times. Yet your score is higher than mine. David set down his plasma rifle carefully. You optimized for accuracy. I optimized for effectiveness. That makes no sense. You took direct shots that were harder to land. I took indirect shots that were harder to avoid. Same result, different path. But the targeting computer is a tool, not a solution. It helps you aim. It does not help you think. Nira joined them, her crystalline body refracting the overhead lights into rainbow patterns. You calculated those reflections without a computer. Basic geometry. Earth students learn it in childhood. Because you need geometry to survive on your hazard world? David smiled. We need geometry to do anything. Build a house, throw a ball, predict where water will flow. Physics is not optional on Earth. It is how reality works. Before Nira could respond, Instructor Brell's voice echoed through the training facility. Cadet David, report to the arena. Immediately, the other cadets stepped back. Brell's tone carried something none of them had heard before. Not quite anger, not quite fear. Something in between. David walked to the arena alone. When he entered, he found Instructor Brell standing in the center with Commander Voss, the station overseer. Voss was a tall, thin being covered in smooth gray skin. His large eyes never seemed to blink. Cadet David, Commander Voss said. His voice was soft but carried authority that made Instructor Brell seem almost subordinate. Your performance today was remarkable. Thank you, sir. Too remarkable. You have been at this institute for 6 rotations. You spent 5 of those rotations building band weapons. You barely trained with your assigned equipment. Yet you outperformed cadets who have been here for months. I had good teachers on Earth, sir. Earth. Commander Voss moved closer. A class, 9 hazard world. Tell me, why is your planet classified that way? Because everything on it can kill you if you are not careful, sir. And yet humans thrive there. Why? David met the commander's unblinking gaze. Because we learned that survival is not about having the best equipment. It is about using whatever you have as well as possible, even when you have nothing. Especially then. Commander Voss exchanged a look with Instructor Brell. We have decided to give you a special examination. You will face an adaptive combat AI called the Sentinel. It learns from every opponent, adjusts its tactics in real time, and has defeated galactic combat champions. Why am I fighting it, sir? Because I want to see what happens when a human faces something that adapts faster than you can improvise. David felt a chill run down his spine. And if I lose, you will be expelled from the Institute. Earth's admission to galactic society will be delayed for further evaluation. That is not fair, sir. You are punishing my entire species because of me. On the contrary, Commander Voss said coldly, I am testing whether your species deserves the risk we're taking by allowing humans into our facilities. You claim adaptability is humanity's strength. Prove it. Instructor Brell looked uncomfortable. Commander, this is highly irregular. This human is highly irregular. Standard measures do not apply. Commander Voss turned back to David. You have one rotation to prepare. The examination is broadcast throughout the station. Every cadet, every instructor, every administrator will watch. Show us what humanity can do when faced with something superior. They left David alone in the arena. He stood in the center of the white sphere, mind racing. The Sentinel adapted to strategies and tactics. It learned from combat patterns. It was designed to defeat opponents who fought with skill and training. But David had been inventing weapons for 6 days. He had built firearms, bows, crossbows, slings, and atlatls. He had demonstrated that humans do not rely on single approaches. They invent constantly, adapt continuously, and refuse to accept that any problem has only one solution. The Sentinel could adapt to strategies. But could it adapt to someone who refused to use strategies? Someone who changed approaches so fast that adaptation became impossible? David smiled. Commander Voss wanted to see human adaptability tested. He was about to learn that testing adaptability in humans was like testing the heat capacity of a star. You could do it, but the result might surprise you. David left the arena and headed to his quarters. He had one rotation to prepare. Not to practice, not to plan, but to remember every lesson Earth had ever taught him about survival. He thought about hurricanes, about earthquakes, about floods and fires, and every natural disaster that had tried to kill his species. He thought about how humans responded to each one, not with better technology necessarily, but with creativity, improvisation, and a stubborn refusal to accept defeat. Instructor Brell had tried to teach him that advanced weapons were superior. Commander Voss was about to learn that the most advanced weapon humanity possessed was not technology, that it was imagination. Every display screen on Station Forge 7 showed the same image. The sterile white arena with David standing at one edge, plasma rifle in hand. Across from him, the Sentinel materialized. It looked like a standard Torgoth warrior, but moved with perfect mechanical precision. Thousands of beings watched. Some wanted to see the human fail. Others hoped he would succeed just to witness something unprecedented. Most simply wanted to understand how someone from a hazard world would face a combat AI that had never been defeated by a cadet. Examination begins in 30 seconds, the computer announced. David studied the Sentinel carefully. It stood perfectly still, conserving energy, analyzing him with sensors far more advanced than organic eyes. This was not a training hologram. This was military-grade artificial intelligence designed to learn and adapt. The countdown reached 0. The Sentinel attacked immediately, firing 3 plasma bolts in a pattern designed to limit David's movement options. David dove left and rolled, coming up firing. His shot went wide deliberately, hitting the wall at an angle he had calculated. The reflected bolt struck the Sentinel's shoulder. The AI adjusted instantly, moving to avoid reflected shots. Within 20 seconds, the Sentinel had adapted to David's reflection strategy. It positioned itself where reflected shots could not reach and fired with increased accuracy. David switched tactics. He stopped firing and started moving unpredictably, changing direction every 3 steps, never establishing a pattern. The Sentinel adapted again, using predictive algorithms to calculate probable movements that a plasma bolt grazed David's arm. He felt the heat even through the simulation safeties. The Sentinel was learning faster than he could change approaches. Round 1 to the Sentinel, someone said in the observation areas. David tried environmental manipulation next, but there was no environment. He attempted to use the arena's lighting, But the Sentinel had sensors that saw beyond visible spectrum. Every strategy David employed, the AI countered within seconds. The watching cadets began to whisper. The human was losing. Nera watched from her quarters, her crystalline structure flickering with distress. Adapt faster, she whispered to the screen, but David was adapting. Just not in the way anyone expected. He suddenly stopped moving entirely. He dropped his plasma rifle. It clattered on the floor and deactivated. The Sentinel paused, processing this unexpected behavior. David stood completely still, empty-handed, apparently surrendering. Instructor Brell leaned forward in his office. "What is the human doing?" Commander Voss watched with unblinking eyes, either giving up or planning something. David was planning. The Sentinel adapted to strategies, tactics, and patterns. It learned from combat behavior. But David realized something crucial. The AI was designed to fight skilled opponents who use consistent methodologies. Every galactic warrior followed doctrine, used established tactics, and fought within frameworks. David had no framework. He had spent 6 days inventing weapons that had never existed in galactic warfare. He had demonstrated that humans do not follow established patterns because humans invent new patterns constantly. The Sentinel could adapt to strategies. But what if David used no strategy at all? What if he became pure improvisation, changing his approach so rapidly that adaptation became impossible? David began moving erratically. Not tactically, not strategically, just chaotically. He ran in one direction, stopped suddenly, ran another way. He picked up his plasma rifle, threw it, picked it up again. He fired at random angles that made no geometric sense for reflections. The Sentinel tried to process his behavior. It ran thousands of calculations looking for patterns. But there were no patterns. David was not following combat doctrine or tactical thinking. He was creating controlled chaos. The AI slowed its movements slightly. Processing power maxed out, trying to predict what would happen next. David noticed the slowdown. Half a second of hesitation. That was enough. He began disassembling his plasma rifle while running. He pulled the power cell free and threw it one direction. The barrel went another way. He used parts of his uniform to create visual noise, throwing fabric that caught the light and created false targets. The Sentinel fired at what it thought was David. The shot missed. The AI adapted, but David had already changed approaches again. He grabbed the plasma rifle's barrel and used it as a melee weapon, something no galactic warrior would ever do. Energy weapons were not meant for physical combat. But a metal tube was still a metal tube. The Sentinel processed this new threat mode. In that moment of analysis, David moved behind the AI and struck the holographic projector node at the base of its structure. It was a vulnerability that existed because no one fought at melee range with energy weapons. The Sentinel flickered. Its systems struggled to adapt to damage it was never programmed to expect. David hit it again. And again. The AI tried to turn, but David stayed in its blind spot, moving faster than its predictive algorithms could track because he was not using predictable movements. Finally, the Sentinel deactivated. The holographic form collapsed and disappeared. Silence filled every observation area on the station. No one spoke. No one moved. David stood in the center of the arena, breathing hard, holding a disassembled plasma rifle barrel like a club. The computer's voice broke the silence. Examination complete. Result: victory for Cadet David. The displays erupted. Some cadets cheered. Others argued. A few simply stared in disbelief. Rolf's deep voice rumbled through the general communication channel. The human fought a combat AI with a metal stick, and won. Nera's crystalline structure blazed with light. He did not defeat the Sentinel with superior strategy. He defeated it by having no strategy at all, just constant invention. In his office, Instructor Brell sat back in his chair. His 4 arms hung limply at his sides. For 300 years, he had taught warriors to master weapons, to follow doctrine, to respect established combat principles. The human had just demonstrated that mastery meant nothing if your opponent refused to fight within your framework. Commander Voss stood and walked to the observation window overlooking the arena. David was exiting, looking exhausted but composed. The commander opened a communication channel. Cadet David, report to Conference Room 7. Immediately, David changed direction and headed toward the conference section of the station. He expected punishment, anger, maybe even expulsion despite winning. He did not expect what he found. Conference Room 7 was filled with senior military officials from across the Galactic Defense Council. Representatives from dozens of species stood around a long table, all of them watching displays showing replays of his fight with the Sentinel. Commander Voss stood at the head of the table. Cadet David, thank you for joining us. David saluted awkwardly, not sure of the proper protocol. Sir, we have been discussing your examination. The Sentinel has defeated some of our finest warriors. You beat it with improvisation and a piece of metal. Yes, sir. I did not know what else to do. That is precisely why we wanted to speak with you. Commander Voss gestured to the other officials. For 10,000 years, galactic warfare has followed predictable patterns. Better shields lead to stronger weapons. Stronger weapons lead to better shields. The cycle continues endlessly. One of the other officials, a being made entirely of energy contained in a crystalline matrix, spoke next. Your species approaches warfare differently. You do not escalate technology. You change categories of problems. Sir, you forced the Sentinel to process physical melee combat while it was optimized for ranged energy warfare. You created a problem it was never designed to solve. David nodded slowly. Earth taught us that when one approach does not work, invent a different approach. Never accept that problems have only one solution. Commander Voss stepped closer. The Galactic Defense Council faces a new threat. A species called the Swarm. They're a hive mind that adapts to all galactic arsenal weapons within hours. Our traditional military doctrine is failing against them. And you think I can help? We think humanity can help. Your species has fought wars continuously for your entire recorded history. You have an industrial base of weapon innovation that no other species can match. When you find a better weapon, you do not abandon the old ones. You keep everything and add to it. Another official spoke. A human soldier can use a plasma rifle, a chemical firearm, a blade, a rock, or their bare hands. Most species master one weapon type. Humans master the concept of weaponization itself. David understood where this was going. You want humans to join the fight against the Swarm. No, Commander Voss said. We want you to teach us how to think like humans, how to improvise, how to invent faster than enemies adapt. You will train a new division in adaptive combat theory. I am just a cadet, sir. I barely know you know enough. More importantly, you think differently than we do. That is worth more than decades of traditional training. David stood before the Galactic Defense Council, still processing what they had asked him to do. Train warriors from across the galaxy. Teach them to think like humans. Turn improvisation into doctrine. I will do it, David said. But I have one condition. The room went silent. No cadet had ever made demands of the council. Commander Voss raised one hand. Speak. Humanity must be admitted to the Galactic Council as full members. Equal partners, not curiosities or emergency backup. If you want our help, you need to respect what we bring to the galaxy. Several officials began speaking at once. Some sounded angry. Others seemed intrigued. Commander Voss raised his hand again, and silence returned. Your condition is acceptable. Humanity has proven itself worthy through your demonstration. The formal admission process will begin immediately. Thank you, sir. However, Commander Voss continued, before you begin training others, we require one final demonstration. Not of combat, but of teaching. Show us the human approach to warfare. David was led back to the sterile arena. This time, the seats in the observation area were filled with senior officials, instructors, and selected cadets. Everyone wanted to understand what made human thinking different. You have this arena and nothing else, Commander Voss announced over the speakers. Show us the human way of war. David looked around the empty white sphere. He smiled. This was exactly what he needed. He removed his boot and held it up. This is a projectile weapon. Minimal technology. Maximum effectiveness. Kinetic energy transferred through impact. He threw the boot at the wall. It bounced and hit the opposite side. Basic physics. No power source required. He took off his belt and held it stretched between his hands. This is a flexible striking weapon. Range extension without metallurgy. Used correctly, it can disarm opponents or create distance. He snapped the belt like a whip, creating a sharp crack that echoed through the arena. He used his uniform sleeve to fashion a crude sling. This is a force multiplier, leverage, and angular momentum. Humans have used this design for 10,000 years because it works. The officials watched in stunned silence as David demonstrated how everything, absolutely everything, could be a weapon. This room is a pressure vessel, David continued. The air inside is a chemical weapon if you understand oxidation and combustion. The gravity field is a trap if you can manipulate it. The lights are a distraction if used correctly. The floor is a striking surface. The walls are reflective surfaces for energy weapons. He looked directly at the observation window where Commander Voss sat. You asked me to show you the human way of war. Here it is. Everything is a weapon. Every environment is an arsenal. Every limitation is an invitation to invent something new. Humans do not fight with what we have. We fight with what we can create from what we have. Instructor Brell's voice came over the speakers. For 300 years, I have trained warriors. I taught them to master weapons, to follow doctrine, to respect combat traditions. But this human taught me something I had forgotten. War is not about the weapons you carry. It is about the mind that wields them. Brell entered the arena, his forearms spread in a gesture of respect. I banned your weapons because I thought they were inferior. I was wrong. I was not banning weapons. I was banning creativity itself. Every time I told you something was prohibited, you invented something new. You turned my restrictions into motivation. You were a good teacher, instructor, David said. You taught me to think harder every time you made things more difficult. That was not my intention, but it was the result. David smiled. The more you limited me, the more creative I became. You thought you were removing my options. You were actually expanding them. Commander Voss entered the arena next, followed by the other council officials. The Galactic Defense Council has made a decision. David Reed, you are hereby promoted to instructor status. You will create and lead a new training program in adaptive combat theory. Thank you, sir. When do I begin? Immediately. Your first class of cadets is already assembled. The arena doors opened. 50 cadets entered, including Nira and Rolf. They formed ranks, waiting for instruction. David looked at them. Species from across the galaxy, each one trained in traditional methods, each one believing that advanced technology was the key to victory. Welcome to adaptive combat theory, David began. Everything you learned about warfare is correct. Energy weapons are powerful. Shields are effective. Advanced technology provides advantages. But today you will learn something else. You will learn that the deadliest weapon in the galaxy is not technology. It is imagination. He gestured around the arena. This room has everything you need to create weapons. But the weapons you need are not objects. They are ideas. Your first assignment is simple. I'm going to lock you in an equipment room with the lights off. You will have 1 hour to figure out how to escape using only what you find inside. Nira's crystalline structure flickered with confusion. But we are not locked anywhere yet. No, but you will be. And when you are, you will discover something important. That restrictions do not limit capable people. They motivate them. The human species learned this lesson over millions of years of evolution on a planet that tried constantly to kill us. Now, I'm going to teach you that same lesson. Over the next several weeks, David's course became the most talked about training program on Station Forge 7. His methods seemed crazy at first. He would disable equipment and force cadets to repair it without tools. He would create impossible scenarios and demand solutions. He would ban obvious approaches and watch students struggle until they invented new approaches. Slowly, they began to understand. Rolf learned to use his massive strength in unexpected ways, not just for direct combat, but for leveraging environment and creating improvised tools. Nira discovered that her crystalline structure could refract energy weapons in ways no one had considered, turning her body into a defensive and offensive asset simultaneously. Other cadets began inventing their own solutions. A flying species learned to use aerial perspective for reconnaissance and targeting. A species with multiple arms discovered they could operate several improvised weapons simultaneously. Each student found that their unique biology was not just a trait, but a tool. "You're teaching them to be human," Instructor Brell observed one day, watching the class through observation windows. "No, David Corrective. I am teaching them to be themselves, but with human perspective. Humans are not special because we are stronger or smarter. We are special because we refuse to accept that problems have only one solution. That attitude can be learned by anyone." 3 months after David began teaching, the first reports came back from the front lines against the swarm. A mixed unit of species trained in adaptive combat theory had successfully defended a colony world using improvised weapons and environmental exploitation. The swarm adapted to their energy weapons within hours, but could not adapt to constantly changing tactics that included everything from chemical warfare to gravity manipulation to simple kinetic weapons. Commander Voss visited David's class personally to deliver the news. "Your training methods work. The swarm cannot adapt fast enough when facing opponents who invent faster than evolution. That is the human advantage, sir. We do not wait for biology to catch up. We invent solutions." Indeed, the Council wants to expand your program. We need more instructors teaching these methods across all military facilities. I recommend Instructor Brell for the position. He understands traditional doctrine, which means he can teach others how to think beyond it. Brell, who was standing nearby, looked startled. "I oppose your methods initially." "Which makes you perfect. You know why traditional thinking fails. That makes you ideal for teaching people to overcome it." 6 months after arriving at Station Forge 7, David received a message from Earth. The second human cadet was arriving next week. Her name was Rachel Foster, and she was a combat engineer with experience in disaster relief operations. David smiled as he recorded his response. "Welcome to the Institute. They're going to try to teach you that advanced technology is the only thing that matters in warfare. They are wrong. Show them what humans can do with creativity and stubbornness." Also, Instructor Brell is much nicer than he seems. He will probably ban everything you try to build. When that happens, just invent something new. "See you soon." He sent the message and looked around his classroom. The walls were covered with improvised weapons his students had created. Slings made from spare fabric, staffs from conduit pipes, shields from metal panels, complex devices built from recycled electronics. Every item represented a problem solved through invention rather than technology. Every weapon proved that intelligence was more dangerous than firepower. Nira approached him after class ended. "I have a question about humans." "Go ahead." "Your species spent your entire history fighting each other. Wars, conflicts, violence across millennia. Yet now you teach us cooperation and creative problem solving. How do you reconcile that?" David thought carefully before answering. "Humans fight. That is true. But we also learn. Every war taught us new ways to destroy, yes, but also new ways to build, to adapt, to survive. We turned our capacity for violence into a capacity for innovation. We did not stop being dangerous. We learned to aim that danger at problems instead of each other. And now you teach the galaxy to be dangerous like humans?" "No, I teach the galaxy to be creative like humans. Danger is just a side effect." Nira's crystalline structure flashed with what might have been amusement. "I think you're more dangerous than the swarm, Instructor. The swarm adapts through evolution. Humans adapt through invention. Evolution takes generations. Invention takes seconds." David smiled. "Yeah, we are definitely more dangerous. But we are also on your side now. That is worth something." As David left the classroom that evening, he passed the armory where he had first met Instructor Brell. The racks still held advanced energy weapons, plasma rifles, graviton disruptors, all the tools of modern warfare. But now there were new racks. Simple weapons. Bows, slings, staffs, blades. Weapons that required no power source, no advanced materials, no complex technology. Weapons that would work anywhere, anytime, for anyone who understood basic physics and had the creativity to use them. Instructor Brell stood in the armory, examining a simple wooden bow. I still think energy weapons are superior, Brell said without looking up. They are, David agreed. When they work, and when they do not work. David picked up a staff from the rack. Simple wood, no technology, no power source. Just a stick. Then humans have 10,000 years of experience using things like this. And we are very, very good at it. Brell set down the bow. Commander Voss says your methods may have saved the Galactic Council. That human thinking is the difference between victory and defeat against the swarm. Human thinking is just refusing to give up combined with being too stubborn to accept that problems cannot be solved. Is that what you will teach the next generation of cadets? David looked at the racks of weapons, old and new, advanced and simple, technological and primitive. I will teach them that every challenge is an opportunity. That bans and restrictions are not walls. They're invitations to be clever. That the most dangerous warrior is not the one with the best weapon, but the one who can make a weapon from anything. That sounds exhausting. It is. David smiled. But it is also how humans survived. And now is how the galaxy will survive too. Instructor Brell made a sound that might have been laughter. When you arrived, I thought you would fail within days. I thought your primitive ideas would get you expelled. What changed your mind? You did not just refuse to fail. You turned every obstacle into an advantage. You made me ban dozens of weapons, and each ban made you more creative. You taught me that humans are not dangerous because of what they build. They're dangerous because they never stop building. David nodded. Instructor Brell, that might be the nicest thing anyone has said about humanity since we joined the galaxy. They stood together in the armory, human and alien, student and teacher, representatives of two completely different approaches to warfare that were slowly becoming one unified philosophy. Above them, Station Forge, 7 orbited its neutron star, training warriors from across the galaxy. But now those warriors learned 2 lessons instead of 1. They learned to use advanced technology effectively. And they learned that when technology failed, creativity would always remain.